They say that genius is not born from noise, but from silence. In the dawn of humanity, long before universities, laboratories, or telescopes existed, there were men and women who dared to think differently. In a world ruled by myths and superstitions, where lightning was thrown by gods and eclipses were divine punishments, there arose minds brave enough to ask, what if it isn't so? That simple, almost innocent question was the origin of genius. Not born of a desire for power or fame, but of a constant restlessness, an inner fire that pushed them to see beyond the obvious. Every ancient civilization had its visionaries, but few left marks as deep as the Greek thinkers. Among them stands the figure of Archimedes of Syracuse, perhaps the first true scientific genius in history. Archimedes lived in a time when measuring, calculating, or designing machines was not the work of scholars, but of craftsmen. Yet he fused the mind of a philosopher with the precision of an engineer. It wasn't enough for him to understand the world. He wanted to transform it. His famous principle of buoyancy, still bearing his name today, was not the product of chance, but of patient observation and rigorous thought. It is said that after discovering it, he ran naked through the streets shouting, "Eureka!" But behind that almost caricature-like image lies an eternal lesson, the pure emotion of discovery. Few know, however, that Archimedes also designed a machine capable of setting enemy ships ablaze using parabolic mirrors that concentrated sunlight, an idea so far ahead of its time that it was considered a legend for centuries. Modern experiments have shown it was physically possible, though requiring extraordinary precision. That is the hallmark of genius, turning the impossible into plausible, the unthinkable into probable. But the history of brilliant thought does not belong to men alone. In an age when wisdom was a male privilege, Hypatia of Alexandria rose as one of the most admirable and tragic minds of the ancient world. A mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher, Hypatia taught at the Library of Alexandria, where science was a form of faith in reason. Above all, she believed that knowledge should be shared, not feared. Yet her love for truth condemned her. In the year 415, a fanatical mob brutally murdered her, accusing her of heresy. Her story is not only that of a martyr, but also a warning. Every age fears its geniuses, because geniuses challenge the structures that others need to feel safe. Hypatia knew that knowledge can be an act of rebellion. Perhaps that is why, centuries later, Carl Sagan called her the symbol of the human mind rising against ignorance. Behind every great ancient thinker lies a silent struggle, man against blind faith, doubt against dogma. When Thales of Miletus predicted a solar eclipse in the 6th century BC, many thought him a magician. But Thales did not invoke the gods. He studied celestial cycles and deduced when it would occur. In a single act, he defied an entire worldview. Imagine it for a moment. A solitary man, without a telescope, observing the heavens with his naked eyes, convinced that he could anticipate the movement of the stars. Is there not something deeply heroic in that image? Genius, in its purest form, does not consist in knowing more, but in daring to look where no one else dares to look. That is why many ancient geniuses were misunderstood, even persecuted. Pythagoras founded a secret, almost mystical community where mathematics was sacred and numbers possessed spiritual power. His disciples swore silence over their discoveries, convinced that the truths of the universe could not be freely revealed. Curiously, one of his students, the little-remembered Damo, Pythagoras' daughter, guarded his original writings for years, refusing to sell them for great sums of gold, honoring the promise to protect knowledge above profit. That fidelity to wisdom is the purest echo of brilliant thought. Curiosity, however, has a price. Many of those sages lived isolated, misunderstood, and died never knowing that their work would change the course of humanity. The solitude of the visionary is a constant that crosses the centuries. It is the same loneliness that accompanies anyone who thinks differently in a world that punishes difference. In the Greek polis or Egyptian temples, to think beyond what was permitted was to play with fire. But geniuses accepted the risk because for them, ignorance was a punishment greater than death. During the Roman siege of Syracuse, Archimedes designed catapults and mechanical defenses to protect the city. Yet when soldiers burst into his home, they found him drawing geometric figures in the sand. He refused to move, murmuring, "Do not disturb my circles," just before being killed. That final gesture summarizes an entire philosophy. Even in the face of chaos, the genius seeks to understand order. The ancient sages did not seek recognition, they sought meaning. For them, the universe was a book written in a language that only reason could decipher. Some, like Anaximander, imagined that the earth floated in the void centuries before anyone proved it. Others, like Democritus, spoke of atoms when microscopes did not yet exist. How could they intuit so much with so little? The answer perhaps lies in the way they looked at the world. They did not observe to confirm what they believed, but to discover what they did not know. Brilliant thought, in truth, was born from an attitude, intellectual humility. To know that we do not know, as Socrates said, is the beginning of wisdom. And though that phrase has been repeated 1,000 times, it is seldom understood in full. To admit ignorance is to tear down the ego, to open the mind, and to allow wonder to return. The ancient geniuses lived in awe. They did not fear mystery. They revered it. Today, when everything seems explained and technology offers us instant answers, we forget that genius is not born from an excess of information, but from a lack of certainties. Those early thinkers had no internet, no laboratories, no digital libraries, only their curiosity. And with it, they built the foundations of all modern science. Looking back, one realizes that the true legacy of the ancient geniuses was not their formulas or their theories, but their way of thinking. They taught us that knowledge is not a destination, but a journey, that every question can open an entire universe, and that even in the darkness of the most dogmatic times, there will always be someone who, in silence, dares to ask why, because that's how it all began, with a gesture, a doubt, a mind that refused to conform. The revolution of human ingenuity. The flame of thought, kindled by the sages of antiquity, was nearly extinguished during centuries of darkness. Yet the human mind, like an ember hidden beneath the ashes, waited patiently for its moment. That moment arrived with the Renaissance, when Europe awoke from its long slumber and once again looked to the sky, the human body, and the universe with new eyes. It was an explosion of curiosity, art, and reason. And at the heart of that explosion shone a figure who seemed to contain every talent possible within humanity, Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was not merely a man, he was an era unto himself. Painter, anatomist, engineer, musician, inventor, architect, a mind so vast that his curiosity knew no boundaries. He once said, "He who loves practice without science is like the sailor who enters a ship without a rudder or compass." His life was an obsession with understanding everything. In his notebooks, over 7,000 pages filled with sketches, formulas, and reflections, lay ideas that the world would take centuries to comprehend. One of the most fascinating curiosities about him is that he wrote in mirror script, from right to left, not as a stylistic whim, but to protect his ideas from prying eyes. Many believe he did so because he was left-handed, but his notes show that he sometimes switched hands to write faster. His mind moved faster than paper could keep up. In an age when science and art were divorced, Leonardo united them in perfect harmony. He saw beauty as a natural law and nature as a work of art. But what is most astonishing about Leonardo is not what he achieved, but what he intuited. He designed flying machines when humanity barely understood gunpowder. He conceived a diving suit to explore the ocean depths, a gear-driven war chariot, and a mechanism strikingly similar to a helicopter. It was not magic, it was observation. He studied the wings of bats, the flow of water, the movement of leaves in the wind. While others looked at the world, he read it. Yet history teaches us that genius is not always understood in its own time. Many of Leonardo's inventions remained on paper, asleep in the silence of centuries, until humanity was ready to grasp them. For the genius sees the future through the window of the present, knowing that no one else can see it yet. Soon after Leonardo, another indomitable spirit would challenge the entire world with something even more dangerous than painting or engineering: scientific truth. His name was Galileo Galilei, and his weapon, a simple telescope. With it, he pointed to the heavens and saw what the Church did not want to be seen, that the Earth was not the center of the universe. His discoveries about Jupiter's moons, the phases of Venus and sunspots, were dynamite to the dogmas of his age. Galileo knew the risk. In a letter to his disciple Benedetto Castelli, he wrote, "I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, and intellect has intended us to forego their use." It was a declaration of war against obscurantism. He was tried, humiliated, and forced to recant his ideas, but he never ceased to believe. A famous, though debated anecdote tells that after his abjuration, he murmured under his breath, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. Whether true or not, that phrase became an eternal symbol. Truth cannot be silenced, only delayed. A century later, another genius would take up that legacy and raise it to unprecedented heights. Isaac Newton, a reserved, almost hermetic man who spent more time with his books than with other human beings. During the plague of 1665, the University of Cambridge closed, and Newton returned to his home in Woolsthorpe. There, isolated from the world, he experienced one of the most productive periods in the history of humankind. In barely 2 years, he formulated calculus, the law of universal gravitation, and the foundations of modern optics. The famous story of the apple falling on his head is more metaphor than fact, but there is a lesser-known detail. Newton spent countless nights gazing at the stars from his window, meticulously recording the movement of the moon, convinced that everything in the universe obeyed the same laws. His genius lay not only in observation, but in connecting what no one had ever connected before, that the same force that made an apple fall kept the planets in orbit. Yet the most admirable thing about Newton was not his equations, but his obsession with finding a hidden order. He wrote more about alchemy and theology than about physics, searching for a divine harmony behind the cosmos. His genius was rational, but also spiritual, and therein lies a profound truth. The greatest geniuses do not merely seek to know, they seek to understand why they know. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment were, in essence, a moral revolution, the act of daring to think without permission. Genius became a form of courage. The men who defied ignorance risked not only their reputations, but their lives. And many were forgotten in the margins of history. One of them was Evangelista Torricelli, a disciple of Galileo and inventor of the barometer. In 1643, while attempting to measure the weight of air, he was accused of witchcraft for making liquids rise without touching them. No one understood that atmospheric pressure was the cause. Torricelli died young, never witnessing the impact of his discovery, yet his experiment forever changed meteorology. Another fascinating case is that of Maria Sibylla Merian, a German naturalist of the 17th century who traveled alone to Suriname, something unthinkable for a woman of her time, to study tropical insects. Her book, Metamorphosis Insectorum Surinamensium, revolutionized biology and dismantled the belief that insects were born from mud. Yet for centuries, her name was erased from history books simply because she was a woman. And there is more. Thomas Young, an English physician of the late 18th century, discovered how the human eye functions and proposed the wave theory of light. He also deciphered part of the Egyptian hieroglyphs before Champollion, translated biblical texts, and studied the elasticity of materials. But his name was overshadowed by others more famous. Today, few know that Einstein considered him one of the most brilliant minds in history. All these men and women shared the same flame, faith in reason as a tool of freedom. They believed that knowledge could free humankind from fear. The Renaissance was not merely an artistic period. It was an ethical and mental awakening. Each discovery tore down a wall of ignorance. Each new idea opened a door to the autonomy of thought. The modern world was born from that rebellion, and at its core, genius was nothing more than an act of courage. The geniuses of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment were not gods or prophets, but human beings with admirable stubbornness, the refusal to accept the world as it was given to them. Their legacy is not confined to museums or physics books, but lives on in every mind that dares to question, doubt, and create. The architects of the future. The 19th century opened the doors to a new era, the era of the mind's dominion over matter. Humanity no longer merely observed the universe, it began to rebuild it from within. Electricity, magnetism, relativity, and mathematical logic not only transformed the world, but redrew the boundaries of what was possible. In this revolution of thought and energy emerged figures who seemed more like magicians than scientists. The first of them was Nikola Tesla, the man who dreamed of lighting up the planet. Tesla did not belong to his time. He was a visionary born a century before the world could understand him. In his laboratory in Colorado Springs, he could light bulbs wirelessly, making electricity dance as if it were a musical instrument. His ideas on wireless energy transmission, electromagnetic waves, and alternating current-shaped modern civilization. But his true genius lay not only in what he built, but in how he thought. Tesla could visualize complete inventions in his mind, with all their gears, movements, and calculations, without the need to draw them. In a 1919 letter, he wrote, "I do not need models or drawings. When an idea comes to me, I begin building it in my imagination and test it mentally. If it works in my mind, it will work in reality." He was, quite literally, an engineer of thought. A little-known anecdote reveals the magnitude of his mind. During a dinner with friends in New York, Tesla was challenged to create a new sparkless motor. Instead of taking notes, he fell silent, eyes fixed, for several minutes. When the evening ended, he simply said, "It's done." 2 months later, he presented an induction motor that would revolutionize the use of electricity. His brain was a self-sufficient laboratory. But like many geniuses, he died alone, penniless, and forgotten in a hotel room, while the world he had imagined glowed with his legacy. While Tesla sought to tame the energy of the universe, another genius dared to redefine the very concept of reality, Albert Einstein. His disheveled hair and distracted gaze concealed a mind that defied common sense. When he published his theory of relativity, the world understood nothing, not even most scientists. And yet, Einstein had done something no one before had dared to do, to declare that time and space were not absolute, but elastic, malleable, dependent on the observer. His genius did not lie in complex equations, but in his ability to imagine impossible scenarios. One of his most famous thought experiments was that of chasing a beam of light. Since adolescence, he had wondered what one would see if running at the same speed as light. That question, absurd to anyone else, became the seed of special relativity. Einstein proved that imagination, when guided by logic, can be as powerful a scientific tool as any experiment. The most paradoxical thing about Einstein is that he was never a brilliant student. He detested rote learning and failed his entrance exam to the Zurich Polytechnic on his first attempt. But his mind operated with a freedom that academia could not contain. When asked in 1929 about the source of his inspiration, he humbly replied, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious that curiosity led him to transform physics into a form of philosophy." After Tesla and Einstein, the 20th century saw the birth of a new kind of genius, one who understood not only the physical world, but also the mental one. In the midst of World War II, a young British mathematician named Alan Turing proved that machines could think. His work decoding Nazi messages with the Enigma machine saved millions of lives, but his true revolution was conceptual. In 1936, he proposed the idea of a universal machine capable of executing any calculation describable by an algorithm. In other words, he invented the concept of the modern computer before the technology existed to build it. During his childhood, Turing was considered odd by his teachers. He walked miles to attend class when transportation was cancelled, simply to avoid missing a lesson. One day he arrived with his shoes covered in mud, soaked from the rain. When asked why he had done it, he replied, "Because I couldn't stop my mind." That sentence encapsulates the destiny of geniuses. They cannot turn off their thinking. Turing died tragically, a victim of prejudice, but his legacy planted the seed of the digital age. Decades later, another genius, with an intense gaze and volcanic temperament, would take that seed and turn it into a global revolution. Steve Jobs. Jobs was neither a scientist nor an engineer. His genius was of another kind, the ability to connect art, technology, and human emotion. He believed that machines should not only be functional, but beautiful, intuitive, almost human. He dropped out of college to follow his intuition, studied calligraphy, meditated in India, and learned that design was a form of thought. When he founded Apple, his goal was not to sell products, but to change the way people related to technology. Jobs was obsessed with perfection. During the production of the first Macintosh, he famously ordered the computer's interior, an area users would never see, to be redesigned because it wasn't aesthetically pleasing. "Quality means doing things right even when no one is looking," he said. That mindset, half art, half engineering, turned the computer into an extension of the human being. And so, little by little, the architects of the future built a world where the line between man and machine began to blur. Today, we live on that very border. Artificial intelligence, algorithms, robotics, everything around us is the fruit of centuries of accumulated genius. But behind every technological advance lies a human imprint, curiosity, imagination, and the desire to understand ourselves. We could say that artificial intelligence is the heir to human genius, not because it thinks like us, but because it was conceived to imitate us. Every line of code is a projection of our decisions, fears, and dreams. When we train an AI, we teach it to think as we do, but also to repeat our limitations. Perhaps deep down, AI is not a threat, but a mirror, one that shows us what we are capable of creating and what we still fail to understand. And so arises the great question: can we learn to think like geniuses? The answer is not found in laboratories or books, but in our attitude toward knowledge. Geniuses are not supernatural beings. They are people who refuse to accept the obvious, who look at chaos and seek patterns, who fail again and again without losing curiosity. They all shared something in common, a blend of non-conformity, sensitivity, and wonder. It is not about having an extraordinary IQ, but about keeping alive the ability to be amazed, to look at a beam of light, a falling apple, an equation or a circuit and ask why, or better yet, what if? Every innovation, from fire to artificial intelligence, was born from that simple gesture. The geniuses of the past left us more than discoveries. They taught us a way of being. Tesla reminded us that thought is energy. Einstein, that imagination can bend time. Turing, that machines can reflect the human mind. Jobs, that technology can be poetry. All of them, in their own way, showed us that the true power of humanity lies in its ability to imagine a world different from the one before it. And perhaps that is their greatest gift, to remind us that true progress does not begin with a machine, but with an idea that someone somewhere dares to think for the very first time.